I'll be one of the moderators today. My name is Oleksandra Ustinova. I'm a member of the Ukrainian Parliament, chair in Holos faction, and also chairing the Commission on Arms Control. And if I may, I just want to briefly introduce our panelists today. Senator Portman, he is the former co-chair of the Ukrainian caucus in Senate, in the US Senate. And I don't know if we have the better friend in Senate, because I remember since day one, he would go every week on the floor and give a speech about Ukraine. I think he was educating senators more than anybody else did in Senate. And I think it was more than 30 speeches that you have given. And everybody literally had to listen to him about all the updates in Ukraine. So please give an applause, because this is one of our best friends. Representative Jim Costa from California. We call him the Ukrainian Godfather, because he is the one literally opening the doors for us, and sometimes even fighting with his own duty, saying that's family now, you know, because he did baptize a Ukrainian kid after the war broke. So thank you so much, Jim, for everything you've been doing and for all the efforts you've put. Salud Carbajal from California as well. We actually have 3 Californians here. So this is a sunny state, so hopefully we're gonna have some better weather. So Salud is a former Marine. He's a senior member at the House Armed Service Committee, and he used to be the vice chair of the four-country caucus. I'll say there is a caucus of veterans, of former people who served in Army and Marine in different types of the Army units. That they call them four-country, but I sometimes call them for Ukraine caucus, because these people has always been supporting us more than anybody else. This is the bipartisan caucus led by the With Honor group. And I think I've never seen anyone signing letters or making statements as fast as they did, and we never had to explain them why we need it, because they're all veterans and they understand what the war is and what the needs are. So thank you so much for joining us, Salud. Jimmy was actually the co-founder of the Four Country Caucus. He is a former Marine, California as well. And Jimmy, I think I met Jimmy probably a week after the war broke. And I honestly admire him, because I remember when there was a fight in Congress and they wanted to include into the Ukrainian supplemental package the COVID package, which Democrats wanted to pass and which must either in the Ukrainian package. He was one of those people who stood up against his own party even and said we shouldn't be trading Ukraine, we shouldn't be putting them under danger. And I understand as a politician how difficult it is sometimes, and I really want to thank you. And Jimmy, I think it's your second trip within the last months. He's been to Odessa, now he's back to Kyiv. So, and trust me, this is really difficult to travel, because it takes 3 or 4 days just for one day to spend here to support Ukrainians. So thank you so much. Jimmy Panetta. Don Bacon. Don is our Republican biggest friend in the House. So if you've ever seen, and there has been photos of an entrance of a cabinet, an official cabinet in the House, of a congressman with a big Ukrainian flag saying Russian warship, not gonna, you know how it ends? That's his cabinet. He put it up the first day of war and it's still there. Every time I need to impress someone, somebody from the Ukrainian delegation, I just go through his cabinet and I'm telling them, see, this is a Republican, this is the guy who's fighting for us. So he's a general, he's a flyer. He was one of the co-founders on the Republican side of the Four Country Caucus, which sometimes I call the For Ukraine Caucus. So thank you so much, Nebraska, not California. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and indeed thank you for being with us. And we agreed that she will be the good girl and I'm the bad girl. And I have to apologize for the tough questions, because of course you are only here because you are with us and you are truly with Ukrainians and you support us anyway, but we have to ask these difficult questions. And indeed our panel is looking 1 year ahead. But I think the first question actually should relate to the ongoing campaign period right now. How exactly can Ukraine steer its path towards victory through, among other things, the electoral campaign which is going on right now in US. How should we relate to this campaign to make sure that the outcome is the best for all of us? Because you are friends, I think you could perhaps advise us on from both sides in a bipartisan way. So who wants to start? Maybe you over there, because
Jim Costa wants to start.
Rob, would be very, very grateful if you started, because of your status in this room. Maybe you're more free.
Well, thank you. I want to thank my colleagues on this panel for their strong support for Ukraine, and I think this is appropriate to have this panel. I want to thank Victor and all the sponsors for the Yalta Economic Security, the 20th year. That deserves a round of applause. I think that we're all here. The question of this panel is, will the U.S. continue to support Ukraine a year from now? And clearly none of us have a crystal ball, and there are a lot of factors that will determine what happens a year from now. But my answer is yes. The United States will support Ukraine a year from now, and I think the question is to what degree? And clearly, after the G7 meetings, there was an accord signed by President Biden and by President Zelensky that talks about a 10-year commitment. Obviously, it would be better if that 10-year commitment was ratified by Congress. There is a couple of our colleagues that are looking at making a part of that 10-year commitment in the form of legislation. We'll see where that may go. And there's the other factor, shall we say, that everybody is aware of, and that's the elections. The elections in the first week of November. And you've got a little bit of a California-centric group here, and then we have two Republicans with my colleague Representative Bacon and Senator Portman, and they should obviously opine. I think it's a very close race. I think it will continue to be a very close race up until Election Day. It possibly is going to also impact the House seats as to whether or not Republicans continue to maintain the majority there. I think Democrats are very competitive. And so what will be the majority in the House will also have an impact. And the Senate is going to be challenging, I think, for the Democrats to hold. But the top of the ticket will impact both, I think, who has the majority in the House and the Senate. And I could lay out a couple of different scenarios in terms of the degree of support 1 year from now by the United States. And by the way, this also impacts our support, I think, in Europe with our allies. And I could portray another scenario if the elections turn out another way. But since I don't have that crystal ball, I won't predict, except that I think Democrats are in a very, very competitive position at this point in time, and I think we've got a very strong ticket. Having said that, I'd be really happy to hear my colleagues, Representative Bacon and Senator Portman, talk about what they think the elections may portend in November. But clearly, those are going to be key factors.
Thank you, indeed. Senator Portman, please.
Well, first of all, thank you all for once again convening this conference. And a year from now, as we all know, the rightful borders of Ukraine will be reclaimed. The counteroffensive will have been remarkably successful. Crimea will be back, Donbass back, and we'll be celebrating. Let me come down to my senses here. I am encouraged, and I do think this has been a good conference and a lot of good discussions, including with Ukrainian military officials we had today, and some of the soldiers who were on the front lines. God bless them. Slava Ukraini. I just love saying that. So I am hopeful, but I think a year from now, there will be a need for substantial additional aid. And the one point that I make to some of my media friends who say this was a very close vote, the vast majority of Republican senators and all of the Democrats voted for the aid package in the Senate. And in the House, and my colleague, Representative Bacon, who was one of the brave individuals who stood up to the sort of status quo in our party at that time in the House, but almost a majority of House Republicans voted for it. And I think every Democrat did, Jim, is that right? So it was a large vote, and it was a large amount of money, and we were able to defend it because the American people generally support what we're doing. Not everybody, but the most recent poll I saw was University of Maryland. Some of you may have seen this, and this came out a couple of weeks ago, and the poll showed more support for aid to Ukraine today than just before the vote. So the vote, and this was before the counteroffensive, then they fielded this survey before the counteroffensive, which I think is even gaining more interest and support among Americans. So I don't buy into this media narrative sometimes that says that we can't continue to provide aid to Ukraine. We have to make the arguments, we have to make them forcefully. We have to counter the disinformation that's out there, some of which, in my view, comes from Russia, particularly with regard to religious liberty. I see one of my colleagues here in the room, because there were Republicans who thought that somehow Ukraine did not allow for religious liberty, and somehow Russia does. Of course Ukraine does, and Russia does not, and we were able to make that point, and people like Speaker Johnson were actually quite moved by that. So I thank all of you who support these efforts of just telling the truth, but doing so forcefully and aggressively to be sure we're countering some of the misinformation and disinformation that's out there. So I'm hopeful, regardless of the outcome of the election. I agree with Jim. I think it's kind of a jump ball. The House, the Senate, probably the Senate goes Republican based on what I'm seeing. The House, I think, is a jump ball. The presidency is a jump ball. But I do think, regardless, the aid package will have support. It's not to say that there aren't some potential members of the new administration who are not as pro-Ukraine as I wish they were if Donald Trump were to be reelected. But there was one distinguished former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who may still be here now. I know he was here yesterday, who's an example of someone who may well be in the next administration who is very supportive of Ukraine. So there's a difference of opinion, but I think ultimately it comes back again to where the American people are, where the Congress is, and how all of us can do a better job of communicating the true story of what's going on here and the importance of this battle to the battle for the soul of democracy. This is not just about Ukraine and not just about America. This is about what kind of world we will all live in. And those countries around the world like Russia and China and North Korea and Iran are watching very carefully. So my hope is that a year from now we'll be successful in continuing the aid package, whether it's a longer term package, which would be great, or whether it's simply another supplemental.
Thank you. We've heard both sides, and it risks, of course, to sound all a little bit like campaign, and it's understandable. Thank you very much. And indeed, we in Eastern Europe, not only Ukraine, we are all very supportive and very, very supportive of what the action from both sides have been to help Ukraine. And we really respect you all for what you have done. It's really, well, otherwise Ukraine probably would have lost already. But sometimes I have the feeling that our deeds are better than our words. And sometimes it feels like we are a little bit too timid, like we are blinking from morning till evening, discussing what Putin might think, what Putin might consider escalation. I mean, he considers escalation what he wishes to, but I think we should do what Kamala Harris's advert, using also Ronald Reagan, by the way, in this advert, says, you need to defend American values globally. And we're grateful for this kind of thinking and also wording. And particularly at this point of time, we are seriously worried about, this noise. What would Putin think? Why do we hear that much of that? Who wants to answer that question? Why do you hear so much about worries about what Putin thinks, which is hindering our action, despite the fact that weapons are on the ground, we are not using them as we should? Please.
I would say one reason why that comes up, although I think we give him way too much attention, is that he's been irresponsible. And of course, I heard one of my colleagues at a previous discussion say that basically Russia under Putin is a gas station with nuclear weapons. They aren't really the 20-foot monster that we made them out to be. Monster, yes, but this credible government that we made out to be over the years. And so I think we just need to be more aggressive and not be so mindful of the BS that we keep hearing from Putin. I'm a Marine. I was going to use some sultry language, but I won't.
Please do.
But I wanted to go back. I'm going to let Jimmy use some sultry language beyond after I say these words. But I wanted to go back and also answer part of your previous question. You know, we all have our crystal balls, and we don't know what the outcome of the election is going to be. Obviously, as a Democrat, I'm hopeful, and it's going to be a certain way. But what you asked the question, what can be done to ensure that support from the United States continues to be there for Ukraine? And so my mother always taught me, worry about the things you can control, because the things you can't control, and we don't have a crystal ball to tell us what the outcome is going to be, is a couple of things. One, continue to be dogged about the accountability of the weapons and the aid that the United States continues to be Ukraine in terms of being accountable. That, I think, is at the forefront of giving the United States the confidence that they need to continue the support. Secondly, I think we need to point out, because there is misinformation in the United States, that it's only the United States that's helping Ukraine. Well, we know that NATO and the European Union has been even more so supportive in terms of resources. And we need to remind the American people that we, unlike some have characterized, are not the only ones. This is a united front, Europe and the United States. And since I am here and I am a Marine, Putin.
Well, Oleksandra, over to you. Maybe nuke Putin would have been better, but okay, Oleksandra, over to you.
Well, thank you so much. I think everybody, it's going to be in the news the day after tomorrow everywhere, at least in Ukrainian for sure. So everybody keeps saying there's still going to be support coming to Ukraine. My question would be, we understand that if we continue the same level of support, Ukraine going to be destroyed a lot more, I would say, in upcoming years. What would be an advice to a candidate? And I would like Don you to say, and one of the Democrats, if I may, what would be two advices to your president if your president wins, if your party, whether it's Republican or Democrat? Two advices to tell them in the Oval Cabinet the two things that they need to do first for Ukraine to defeat Russia.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate being with both. I was just visiting Estonia here just a month or two ago, and it was great to be with all of you and being with the servicemen and women today. They're on the front lines. It was very touching. They're innovators, they're warriors, and then to see the leadership, you can feel the heaviness on their hearts as they're making decisions that involves the loss of their own men and women on the front lines. And you can see it, that's a lot of responsibility. I've served up to a 1-star level. This is at the 3-star level and beyond. You can just see the shouldering that responsibility. So I respect them. And it's great to be up here with my fellow For Country caucus folks that we're all veterans, half Republican, half Democrat, trying to work together. So to one of our favorite parliamentarians here, two advices that we should give. Well, first of all, my nominee has a lot of moral ambiguity on this. He should not. We should have moral clarity that, first of all, we're supporting Ukraine is the righteous moral cause. Ukraine's fighting for its independence, it's fighting for freedom, fighting for free markets, and the United States stands up for those principles, and we stand up against bullies. And we're not isolationists. We learned in the 1930s that does not work. And some of the folks in my party have gone to the 1930s DNA of republicanism, and it doesn't work, right? I would say conversely, on the other side, it's always been too little, too late, dragging their feet. And so my advice would be that let's ensure Ukraine has the quality and quantity of weapons now. And the longer this fight goes on, I think the harder it is on Ukraine. That's a smaller country compared to Russia. Russia doesn't mind how many people die, right? They don't care if hundreds of thousands of their own people die. We do care, because we care about people, we care about our citizens. So the longer this goes on, it's harder on Ukraine, it's harder on the allies. So let's give the quantity and quality of weapons so that we can break Putin's will. And take those ROEs off of Ukraine. Hit valid military targets that are threatening Ukraine. I don't care if it's 1,000 miles away. If they're flying bombers from Central Asia to launch cruise missiles against Ukraine, let's take those bombers out. I prefer taking them out on the ground as an Air Force guy, right? Secondly, I think we always do better when we speak with moral clarity and what's going on here. Too much moral relativism when it comes to Putin and Russia. What they're doing is wrong. It's evil, right? And so Ukraine's the victim. They're the neighbor being attacked. By the way, they want to go to the West to be part of the Western thing. That's a great thing. Can you imagine a free, democratic, free market Ukraine at peace? That will be a game changer for Europe. But I think we should have moral clarity about who Putin is and what Russia's doing. And I think by doing that in the campaign, by the way, too, will help whoever wins to ensure they're in the right spot on Ukraine. Because I think 70% of Americans are definitely with us. And so whoever wins, when they see the real numbers, they're going to go, we're democracy. We're going to represent the far majority when it's all said and done.
Look, thank you, and obviously thanks to the Yalta European Strategy Conference. And of course, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Ry Barkot and With Honor that has basically allowed us to come here. So I want to acknowledge Ry and the good work that he's did. And obviously here on the ground, acknowledge our Ambassador Brink, who is on the front lines and obviously helping out and ensuring our leadership here. Thank you, Ambassador. If it turns out to be President Harris, I think the first thing I would advise her, to your question, is put a supplemental package out there. Get ahead of it, put it down, and make her sentiment clear about the support that we need to show as a country and continue to show as the United States of America. Do a supplemental. Do another supplemental, making sure there's more support there. First thing I'd tell her to do. Second thing I'd tell her to do, or advise her to do, is show up. Come here. Show up. That's why we're here, because it's important to show up. And you know what? I do believe that coming from the United States Congress, that if you put a supplemental package on the floor of Congress, it will pass. It's just getting it to the floor. That's the hard part. If you look at the numbers of the last supplemental, and the senator referred to this, it was 311 to 112 no's. 311 yeses to 112 no's. That should tell you right there that overwhelmingly, in a bipartisan basis, Republicans and Democrats, despite what you see on TV, support Ukraine. Okay, let's make that clear. However, going forward, we need to continue to make sure that there is the proper explanation over and over to the doubters, to the people who, I'm not talking about the extremes. I'm not talking about what you referred to as the extreme right or the timid left. I'm talking about the people who voted for that, the people we can get. Continue to make sure people like Mike Johnson, for example, Speaker Johnson, and Don can probably speak to this better, but obviously before he put that supplemental on, I think that was a big part of his learning process to be a leader and to be Speaker of the House. But to Mike Johnson's credit, he took time to listen to everybody. He took time to listen to why it was important to have that supplemental. And so I believe that it's that type of explanation that is incumbent upon us as members of Congress to continue to talk to our constituencies, but it's also incumbent upon Ukrainians to ensure that there is that definition of victory that people in the United States need to hear and people in the United States must support.
Thank you. I'm slightly worried that among that advice, the piece about Ukraine in NATO as quickly as possible was missing. Does anybody want to comment on that?
Repeat the question.
Ukraine and NATO.
Ukraine in NATO as quickly as possible. would not be among your first couple of things you would suggest to your newly elected president. Should Ukraine be invited to NATO as quickly as possible?
Well, a number of folks have different views on that, but the process has already started, both for EU acceptance and the various steps that Ukraine is going through for that to take place. And at the same time, there is an effort here for the organization of NATO to work through the process of Ukraine becoming a part of it. Certainly Putin, as you noted, has indicated that those are part of his conditions for a peace agreement. No NATO, no EU, for Ukraine to neuter its military. I mean, and leave the borders more or less as Putin wants them. None of those are even beginning for a negotiation on the part of Ukraine or for the Western alliance. That's not why Putin, let's be clear about this. Modern day Russia is a syndicate masquerading as a country with a mob boss. Got it? That's what Putin is. He's a mob boss. And I concur with my colleagues here. I mean, we need to do everything we possibly can at this point in time to ensure that when ultimately there is a negotiation, and there will be a negotiation, that Ukraine is in the strongest possible position to ensure that the terms that they are willing to agree with reflect the boundaries that they think are the integrity of what Ukraine is, and that it reflects their ability to be among the members of Western nations, a part of the EU, and ultimately a part of NATO. That's, I think, ultimately the negotiations where they need to be.
Real briefly, Ukraine has earned the right to be in NATO, and Russia has lost the right to say anything about it.
Yes, please. Please.
I think that both well said. My feeling is Ukraine should be able to start the map process right away, because that actually gives Ukraine and those of us who support Ukraine more leverage at the eventual negotiation. So let's start the process. And I've been for NATO for the simple reason that the Budapest Memorandum didn't work. In other words, what's the security guarantee that Ukraine can depend on other than Article 5? So I think ultimately that's where you have to end up. It's not simple to say that because it makes the negotiation more difficult. But again, I think we start down the path for a serious consideration. And by the way, there are members of NATO that do not have certainly armed forces anywhere near what Ukraine has in terms of sophistication, in terms of modernization. I mean, this is a country that definitely would add to NATO's arsenal in an extreme manner. It would be appropriate from a military point of view. I understand that EU accession is also important, and perhaps that's the easier step vis-a-vis Russia. But I think beginning the process now would be smart.
Yeah, Oleksandra, over to you, but maybe you didn't hear this morning, but we heard the good and the bad news that actually Ukrainian military industry has the production capability of about 20 billion today, maybe 30 billion next year. But the trouble there, of course, is that they only have 7 billion to produce. They have overcapacity and really the lack of money in this system. So maybe you have a solution to that as well, but Oleksandra has...
Well, the easiest solution would be invest in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
Especially from the United States. I have a quick question, if I may, to our Republican colleague, Senator Don. Maybe, I don't know who can comment on that, but so when we're looking at your elections right now, in your election cycle, the question is, if Trump comes to power, he says that the war will be over in a day. Can you comment on that and tell us how this can be done and what's going to be happening towards the policies of Ukraine? Senator?
You probably got a better answer.
I'll pass that one along to Don.
One of you has to.
Well, let me make a comment about Republican politics. Because again, I think there's a misunderstanding out there. Think about this. Remember all the fury and fire that was connected with this vote in the House. Remember that Republicans like Don Bacon stood up and were brave, and a majority of Republicans did not. Near a majority were with you, but it was not a majority. Guess what happened? Those Republicans went home and ran in their primary elections, where the issue was, among other things, Ukraine and aid to Ukraine. Don did. He had a primary shortly afterwards. My recollection is you won that primary by about 40 points.
24, but I would have taken 40.
Okay. I thought it was 42 or 24, but so not a single Republican, correct me, lost his or her primary. Not one. And maybe more importantly, I heard from my colleagues in the Senate, Republican who went back home, who were worried, frankly, about getting blowback from their constituents, and they all said, you know what, at our town halls, our discussions with our constituents, it didn't come up, and if it did come up, it was a soft pitch. I don't know if you agree with that, Don, but that's the sense that I got.
Yep.
So this notion that somehow this is a big political issue in our party, I just don't think is accurate. And I think we need to keep that in mind. In terms of what happens after the election, again, as I said earlier, I think there are different camps within the Republican campaign and potential administration right now. I pointed out Secretary Pompeo, but also Robert O'Brien, some of you know, who was National Security Advisor, strong supporter of Ukraine. There are others as well, former military. I see Wes Clark here. There are some Republican former military types who you know who are very supportive of Ukraine, who are advising President Trump. So we'll see. My hope is that we can make the arguments persuasively, and then ultimately the American people will speak up.
Thank you, Senator Don.
I think it is, again, it's a vocal minority and they are vocal. And my advice to the leadership in our party, you got to stand up to it. I think for a while, because most politicians want to stay under the radar, they don't want to be a lightning rod, but we let these folks fill the room with their message, and I think it put us on our heels for a bit. And I've learned you got to stay on top of this and make your case. So, you know, I've been vocal from day one trying to defend this, which probably helped lead to me getting a primary. But that's all right. We still won overwhelmingly. It was a 2.5 time landslide, right? And we didn't back off where we're at. I like telling people I'm the party of Reagan, the party of Eisenhower. I'm not the party of Bannon. And there's a difference there. And we should do the Heisman and keep that message away. So let's just say that President Trump, before President gets elected, I'd like you to remember, what did Eisenhower say in 1952 when he was running? I will end the war in Korea. What did Richard Nixon say in 1968? I'm going to end the war in Vietnam. I think what you're hearing is something like this, and it gives them the ability to try to straddle both parts of this dialogue so he can win. He's trying to keep both wings of this together for the election. I believe if he gets elected or nominated, when you have over 2 out of 3 Americans supporting Ukraine, I think it's 3 out of 4, somewhere in that area, that argument's going to win out. And I believe, too, the truth will win. We cannot let Russia prevail. It's in our strategic interest that we have an independent Ukraine that values democracy and free markets. I mean, this is just so clear, right? And I think those messages will win.
Thank you so much.
But with all due respect, Don, Richard Nixon, Eisenhower, Donald Trump doesn't hold a candle to either of those presidents, so let's make that clear. In a lot of his talk, I get it. There's campaign talk, and then there's policy talk. But his is clearly rhetoric that goes above and beyond the pale. And so
I wish it was more. Moral clarity.
It makes your job a lot harder. I get that, but I do believe that, like you said from the beginning, there's got to be that moral clarity, and you got to be firm on that. And I think it's up to us, whatever side you're on, and people like Don Bacon, to hold who's ever in office accountable, be it your party or the opposite party, and to continue to remind them the support that's necessary going forward. And so, like I said, trust me, there are, despite what you see, there are Democrats and Republicans, like I said, that are staunch supporters of Ukraine. I get that at this point, you look at the Republican Party and it can be tough, especially what you see on the extremes. It can be tough in our party too, in our extremes. I get the crap. I have a very blue Democratic district, and people think I'm a hawk because I support Ukraine in parts of my district. But I think, as Don mentioned, as long as you're able to explain why we need to continue this type of support, not just for the Ukrainian people, but for Europe and for democracy as a whole, I believe that's what wins out.
I think we need to hold the conferences in each district to explain why Ukraine needs to be supported. A quick question to our colleagues from the Democratic Party, and I know, Jimmy, maybe you saluted Jim. Do you think Biden administration has done enough? Or is there something that can be done more?
Go ahead.
He absolutely could do a lot more. And we are hearing about the feet dragging that's happening with the number of weapons, with the permissions that's needed to be able to take up certain targets. Certainly, I think the administration is walking extraordinarily slower than they need to. And I think they're giving way too much credibility to Putin. And I think we need to be more aggressive, clear, and we need to move forward and provide Ukraine the weapons that they need. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to make Putin any better. It's not going to make him any more responsible. So what we need to do is show Putin by making sure that Ukraine has the resources and the reinforcements it needs sooner rather than later. And we've been dragging our feet from day one way too long, and it has not helped Ukraine get to the victory sooner rather than later.
I would give a different perspective. I think that certainly I would concur with Salud that there has been an effort to micromanage this war, both within the White House and the Department of Defense. And I think that has caused frustration for many of us in Congress. But clearly, the administration, I think, deserves credit for, after the invasion, coming together. I mean, they began to build this coalition within NATO and sharing intelligence information. I think a lot of that was wrong. They overestimated Russia's ability and underestimated Ukraine's capability. But clearly, they were all in. They met early on. And you can cite specifics, whether advanced weaponry came at the time it needed to be, at the level it should be. And clearly those are critiques that I think have merit. However, in bringing the coalition together, I mean, who would have thunk 2.5 years ago Sweden and Finland would be a part of NATO? NATO today is stronger than it's been since the Cold War. Who would have thunk that the European Union would put the level of financial support on behalf of Ukraine? Why? Well, in part because they knew the United States was all in, and we were bringing together this coalition of democracies that would stand up for Ukraine. Did I think that some of the efforts in when I mean, I've been working on this effort on F-16s with my colleagues for over a year. That could have happened sooner. The training could have happened sooner. Certainly those are examples. But let me give you the other side of that coin. The president offered the $60 billion supplemental in October of last year. And the Speaker of the House wanted to make that contingent for political purposes on border security. So we said, okay, we'll work that out. And we reached an agreement for the most comprehensive border security package we've had in the country in 20 plus years. And then the previous president says that, no, don't do that. I want to have this as a campaign issue. And during that whole time, 5.5 months took place, Ukraine suffered. Russia had advanced. And so there's responsibility on the part of many of my Republican colleagues who could have passed that supplemental when the president urged us to pass it. So on balance, I think the administration has done a good job. I certainly disagree with the way they have attempted to micromanage some of these efforts. Now we got to go forward and we got to be all in.
Thank you. I have an additional question to our Democratic friends here. Biden's White House has been talking about strategic failure. This aggression has to end in strategic failure for Russia. Will Kamala Harris's White House start talking about Ukrainian victory, Ukraine whole and free? Have we hope?
I believe that in the opportunity she has had to speak at it, like the convention on a national stage with, I think, millions and millions of American viewers, that was one of her points. She said that we will continue to, I mean, she didn't put it as specific as that, but she made clear where her administration would stand in supporting Ukraine.
I agree. I think she's been crystal clear that she would continue to be supportive, not only of supporting Ukraine, but our own military, making sure we have the most lethal capabilities as the United States military.
And during the debate, when the former president was asked, do you support a Ukraine victory over Russia, he didn't answer the question. He said, I want to end the war. He refused to answer the question that he would support Ukraine's victory over Russia when he was directly asked that question.
This is true. That is what we are worried. Unpredictability on the Republican side and being quite timid on the Democratic side. But over to you, Oleksandra. Yeah. Okay.
So plenty of blame to go around. And I've been critical at times of the administration not moving quickly enough. And in almost every instance, they moved. But it would take 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whether it was Stingers and Javelins at the start or whether it was F-16s or even Abrams M1 tanks at one time and air defense systems. So ATACMS are finally here. We need more ATACMS. We need more long-range missiles. And we need to have the ability to attack those positions that are attacking Ukraine. And it's pretty simple. And I think we're at a pivotal point. And for all of us, Republicans, Democrats alike, we ought to focus on that. Not so much try to relitigate the past, because there's, again, plenty of blame to go around probably. The American people deserve a lot of credit for opening up their wallets to Ukraine. We have to acknowledge that. And they want to continue to, but they want to see progress. And progress is going to come by unshackling these incredible commanders that we met with today who are on the front lines and allowing them to do their job, which is to protect their country and bring this to an end. And if we don't do that, it will continue, in my view, to be a stalemate, and we'll continue to have these discussions, pointing fingers at one another. So I hope everybody in this room will redouble their efforts to encourage not just our administration, but the Europeans and others to say, this is our moment, this is our time. And if we go into the winter without having some more progress, and if the Russian offensive continues in the east, my worry is that we will have put Ukraine in a very difficult position. The alternative can also be true. And enough missiles and enough permission to take off the handcuffs and to provide for the ability for Ukraine to defend itself, I think is critical right now. And that's what we ought to focus on.
Thank you so much. I think, unfortunately, we have to ramp up. At least that's what I was told. So I would like to thank everyone here on the panel, not just being here and coming, and I know it took you 2 days, but for standing with Ukraine and being strong.
And I would also like to add something, because, we sit here doing this in a light banter, having a few laughs, but I'd like to remind us all that not every Ukrainian soldier who was alive when we started this discussion is still alive. And I think we should always remember that as well. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent point. Let me say one other thing. The support that has taken place in the United States, I can speak of. In Europe, I'm less familiar with. But Sasha Ustinova and a group of other Ukrainian parliamentarians have been tireless over the last 2+ years in being in Washington, D.C., walking the halls and educating members of Congress to the importance of this. And they deserve a large bit of the credit as well for their hard work, because this doesn't happen by itself.